There's this powerful, almost primal link between how an economy is doing and how stable its politics are. When people's financial lives get turned upside down, you can bet the political ground is going to start to shake.
But what is that connection, really? I mean, why is it that hard times so often lead to radical politics? It's a huge question. Okay, let's dig in and unpack this.
To really get it, we've got to go back to the most extreme example there is, the Great Depression. I mean, at its peak, a mind-blowing 1 out of every 4 working Americans was unemployed. Just think about that. This wasn't just a bad recession. It was a full-on societal collapse.
Right, and it's so important to understand that a depression isn't just a recession on steroids. No, it's a completely different animal. We're talking about a deep, sustained crisis that can literally reshape a country for generations to come. And the effects, well, they're everywhere. It's not just about people losing their jobs, not by a long shot. It's this massive chain reaction, right? Businesses start to fail, credit just completely freezes up, and, this is the critical part, political instability just skyrockets as people get desperate for answers, for any way out.
So into this absolute chaos steps Franklin D. Roosevelt. And he got something crucial right away. His first job wasn't just about the economy. It was psychological. He had to restore hope and confidence to a nation that was completely paralyzed by fear. And his response? Wow, it was this absolute whirlwind of new laws and government programs that we now call the New Deal. And it wasn't some single, neat little plan. Oh no, it was a massive, multi-front attack on the Depression from every angle you could possibly think of.
The whole thing was basically built on 3 big ideas: relief, recovery, and reform. So for relief, you had programs like the WPA, which put millions of people back to work. And for reform, you had these game-changing laws like the Social Security Act and the creation of the SEC. The goal there was to build a safety net and a set of rules to make sure a collapse like this could never happen again.
But here's where the story gets complicated, right? The New Deal has this really mixed legacy. On the one hand, yeah, it was a massive success. It put tons of people back to work, it restored hope, and it literally rebuilt huge parts of America's infrastructure. But, and this is the kicker, it never actually ended the Great Depression. Unemployment stayed painfully high all through the 1930s.
So that leads us to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? If the government was doing and spending more than it ever had in history, why wasn't it enough? Why couldn't the economy finally get back on its feet?
Well, it turns out the missing piece of the puzzle was being figured out across the Atlantic by this brilliant British economist, John Maynard Keynes. And his idea was, well, it was totally radical for the time. He said that in a depression, the government has to be the one to step in and spend money. Not just a little, but on a massive scale, on purpose, deliberately running huge deficits to jolt the economy back to life. It couldn't be some half-hearted effort.
And there's this fantastic kind of funny story that just perfectly captures the problem. Keynes and Roosevelt, they had one meeting, and it was a total bust. Neither guy was impressed at all. FDR basically thought Keynes was just some nerdy professor lost in his own equations, while Keynes was just baffled that the president didn't seem to get the sheer scale of spending that was needed. And because of that disconnect, the theory was never really put into practice.
So look what happens next. In 1937, Roosevelt gets worried about all the debt, so he cuts back on spending. And bam, the economy immediately nosedives right back into a recession. But then, World War II happens. All of a sudden, defense spending goes through the roof. And guess what? Unemployment just vanishes, almost overnight. It was the ultimate proof that Keynes was right, not because they planned it that way, but because of the sheer necessity of war.
Okay, so that's the big economic lesson we learned from the Depression. But there's another story here, a much deeper one that's all about psychology. What exactly does a massive economic shock like that do to the way a person thinks and votes?
So the key idea here comes from behavioral economics. It sounds a little academic. It's called reference-dependent preferences. But the concept is super simple. It just means that we humans don't really judge how well we're doing in absolute terms. Instead, we're always comparing our current situation to some kind of reference point, like the salary we thought we'd be making by now, or the lifestyle we kind of got used to.
And here's the crazy part. When you fall way, way below that reference point, you feel this really powerful sense of loss. But what's fascinating is what happens next. It doesn't make you more cautious. It does the complete opposite. It actually makes you willing to take huge risks, to gamble, just for a shot at getting back to where you think you should be.
So you can see this clear psychological path forming.
First, you get hit with a big economic shock. That leads to this feeling of deep disappointment because you're so far from your reference point. And that disappointment is what transforms a person, a voter, from being someone who avoids risk to someone who actually seeks it out. They become what economists call a risk lover. They're looking for that high-stakes bet.
Okay, now let's apply that to an election. Imagine you're that voter. On one side, you've got the safe bet, the mainstream candidate, the incumbent. You know what you're going to get? It's predictable. On the other side, you've got the risky bet, the populist, the radical challenger. Their platform is untested, it's a huge, uncertain change.
And here is the absolute core of it all. For that voter who feels deeply disappointed, the fact that a populist challenger is risky isn't a bug, it's a feature. That's the whole point. They're not looking for safety anymore. They're looking for a lottery ticket, a long shot to win back the life they feel they've lost.
And hey, this isn't just some abstract theory. We've got real-world data that backs this up. A big study in Germany found that people who said they were extremely dissatisfied with their income were way more likely to support populist parties. And the same thing for people who describe themselves as loving risk. The connection is there, it's direct, and you can measure it.
All right, so let's pull all these threads together now. We've got the history, the economics, and the psychology. And when you look at it all, there are really two huge lessons that the Great Depression teaches us.
Okay, lesson number one is the economic lesson. Keynes had it right all along. When you're in a really deep crisis, aggressive, sustained government spending is the most powerful tool you have to fight your way out. And lesson number two is the psychological one. Deep economic pain isn't just about dollars and cents. It literally changes how a voter thinks, rewiring their brain to actually crave the exact kind of political risks they would have run away from in good times.
And I think what this all shows, ultimately, is that you just can't separate economics from human psychology. They're totally intertwined. A crisis isn't something that just happens on a spreadsheet. It happens to people. And it's their response, a response that's born from all that hope and fear and disappointment. That's what really ends up shaping history.
And that really leaves us with a pretty heavy question for today, doesn't it? If we know that this kind of economic pain makes people want to gamble on political risks, then what does that mean for leaders now? The challenge isn't just about fixing the economy. It's about restoring confidence and addressing that deep sense of disappointment before voters decide it's time to bet it all on a risky and totally unknown future.